What happened with the Nazis in Germany after the Second World War, and how did East Germany deal with the former Nazis in their country? Coming up. Hi and welcome to another East Germany investigated video. The split of Germany in two parts occupied by different Allied powers led to the emergence of two different countries that each dealt with their World War II past in a different way. Today we'll take a look at the attitude of the German Democratic Republic towards former Nazis. But it would not be fair to not mention West Germany at all. For some aspects, comparing the two parts of Germany will even give you a better understanding. Now let's go back to 1945, after World War II ended. The Allied Control Council was the governing body of the Allied occupation zones in Germany and consisted of the four occupying powers: United States, Great Britain, France and the Soviet Union. In the period from 1945 till 1948, they issued more than 100 laws, proclamations and directives, replacing the old Nazi legislation. They dealt with things like marriage, rationing of electricity and gas, taxes, but also with the denazification of all four occupation zones of Germany. Law number 10 dealt with the punishment of persons guilty of war crimes, crimes against peace and against humanity. This law was the legal foundation for the Nazi trials. The best known are the Nuremberg trials, where the 24 most important Nazi leaders were convicted, leading to 12 death sentences. The Nuremberg trials were led by the International Military Tribunal, but also in the four individual occupational zones, trials led by the Americans, the British, the French and the Soviets took place. Directive number 24 addresses the removal from public and semi-public office and from positions of responsibility in important private undertakings of all members of the Nazi Party who have been more than nominal participants in its activities, and all other persons hostile to Allied purposes. Part 2 of the directive explains that these are persons that have been active in the party, have authorized or participated in Nazi crimes, have been avowed believers in Nazism, or have supported the Nazi Party or Nazi leaders. The execution of the denazification differed in all four occupational zones. Also, the vigor with which Nazis were tracked down, judged and punished varied substantially from zone to zone. In the West, it varied from a thorough and bureaucratic approach in the American zone, where adult citizens had to fill in a questionnaire about their Nazi activities, via a more moderate approach by the British that focused only on the upper part of the population, to no systematic approach and merely dealing with the most serious cases in the French zone. In the Soviet zone, the denazification was linked to the change to a socialist society and was applied quickly and consequently. The denazification commissions would typically have a majority of members of the Socialist Party. In the whole of Germany, concentration camps were converted to internment camps. In the period 1945 till 1950, the American zone had 37 camps, that did not all exist at the same time, by the way. The Americans used the former concentration camps and prisoner of war camps. Till November 1946, a total of 170,000 people was arrested by the American Counterintelligence Corps and detained in the camps. In the British zone, a total of 91,000 persons was sent to a total of 9 civil internment camps between May 1945 and June 1949. The French zone contained 12 camps where about 21,000 people had been held, spread over the period from 1945 till 1949. And in the Soviet zone there were 10 former prisoner of war and concentration camps converted to internment camps, where till beginning of 1950 a total of around 154,000 civilians was detained. Due to the poor conditions, almost 1/3 of all prisoners did not survive the Soviet camps. The difference between the Soviet and the Western zones was not related to removing people from office, but to the Reemployment process in the end of the 1940s. In the Eastern zone there was an amnesty for former Nazi Party members, where they were allowed to be re-employed but not for internal administration, justice and police functions. Whereas this was not the case in the three Western zones, where people with the necessary expertise, except former high-ranking Nazi officials that had been demonstrably involved in Nazi crimes, were hired. Of course, these cases also existed in East Germany, but to a lesser extent. Many historians have stated that the denazification in West Germany was ineffective or even failed. The persons concerned were not motivated to take responsibility for what they did during the Nazi period. They were more engaged in justifying themselves and in finding proof for their innocence. In order to be spared from severe punishment, suspected persons in the American zone could use an exonerating document, the so-called Persilschein. This document would contain a statement from someone else, preferably a victim or an opponent of National Socialism, saying that the affected person's past was clean. The word Persilschein most probably is derived from persil, a laundry detergent, and is still used today related to getting discharge. Also, towards the end of the 1940s, against the backdrop of the emerging Cold War, the measures against former Nazis were tempered, among other things by generously granting amnesty. The German Democratic Republic profiled itself as the anti-fascist state. In this way, the country distanced itself in the first place from its Nazi past. The GDR stated it was the victim of the National Socialist regime, so it wasn't necessary to take responsibility for the past, and also not to give back companies to their original Jewish owners, etc. And second, East Germany also distanced itself from West Germany. The new socialist GDR positioned itself as the counter-image of the capitalist West Germany, where, according to its propaganda, the situation was irrecoverable, Nazis still playing a big role in the post-war order. The East German anti-fascism was basically anti-capitalism. Back to the internment camps in the Soviet zone. In 1950, the last 3 remaining camps were closed. The detained that had been condemned by the Soviet military tribunal were either released or transferred to East German prisons. Of the remaining detained without trial, about 10,000 persons were released, 500 persons were deported to the Soviet Union, and around 3,500 were brought to justice in the GDR in the Waldheim trials, die Waldheimer Prozesse. The Waldheim trials that took place in Waldheim, a town in the state of Saxony, were processes that took place contrary to the rule of law, partially behind closed doors. Most of the judges were members of the Socialist Party and 3 lawyers were hindered in their work. Most of the sentences were passed quickly and the grand majority of the trials lasted only a few minutes each. 10 processes were show trials. The function of the Waldheim trials was to underline the anti-fascist position of the GDR by means of draconian sentences and to officially finish the denazification with a symbolic act. Almost half of the around 3,300 persons that were convicted were condemned for only just having been member of a National Socialist organization or for being against the expropriations that had started in East Germany. In this way, the GDR statistics of convicted Nazis showed higher figures than was in fact the case. In many ways, the GDR wanted to show that its population was denazified, but that in West Germany it was far from that. The 1953 uprising in the GDR was said to be a fascist coup attempt. The Berlin Wall that was built in 1961 was called Anti-Fascist Protective Wall, Antifascistischer Schutzwall, but based on the way it was constructed, it was obvious that it was meant to prevent people from fleeing from the GDR to West Berlin, not the other way around. Theodor Oberländer and Hans Globke were former Nazis. Oberländer had written anti-Semitic publications and had endorsed ethical cleansing in Poland, where he possibly had been involved in the massacres that took place in Poland and Ukraine in 1941. Globke had played an active role in writing the anti-Jewish laws and possibly was involved in facilitating the deportations of at least tens of thousands of Jews. After the war, they both held political positions in West Germany. Under Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, Oberländer, ironically, became Federal Minister of Displaced Persons, Refugees and Victims of War, and Globke became Chief of Staff of the West German Chancellery. For the GDR, these were excellent cases to show that West Germany was a fascist state. They organized show trials against Oberländer and Globke. Both men were sentenced to life imprisonment, but being West German, they were not present at the process and never served the sentence. After the East German trials, both Oberländer and Globke remained active in politics. In 1965, the GDR published the book Braunbuch, Kriegs- und Nazi-Verbrecher in der Bundesrepublik. Brown Book, War and Nazi Criminals in the Federal Republic. The book listed 1,800 persons that after 1945 got high positions in West Germany. Although in the West at the time the book was considered communist propaganda, more recent investigation has shown that more than 99% of its contents were actually correct. In return, also West Germany issued lists with the Nazi past of East German state officials. In addition to that, in 1981, a brown book about Nazis in the GDR was published, detailing the past of around 200 East Germans that held influential positions. The author, Olaf Kappelt, although he was living in West Germany, got into serious trouble. East German state security agents started to observe his every move and harassed him. This new edition of the book from 2009 contains about 1,000 names. You will find examples of Nazi judges that in the GDR still had judicial power, medical practitioners, concentration camp guards, high-ranked militarists that still could continue working in significant positions. Generally, when former Nazis turned into loyal members of the Socialist Unit Party, the SED, the GDR tended to be more forgiving about these people's past, especially to the ones that were categorized as so-called Mitläufer, fellow travelers. The SED was also said to be the big friend of the small Nazis. The GDR denied the existence of right-wing extremism in its own country, based on its anti-fascism dogma, but it existed throughout the country. The Stasi was well informed about it. The Stasi played also another strange game. They had their contacts among the right-wing extremists in West Germany. In this way they would be informed about Western contacts to East German right-wing extremists, about possible acts of violence against the GDR, and they could use it to prove that West Germany was a fascist state. The Stasi even supported right-wing terrorists in West Germany when they had common interests, for example bomb attacks at American institutions. So I think we can conclude that the denazification in both parts of Germany has not been performed correctly and completely. Thousands of guilty persons were sentenced very lightly or not at all. Also, other persons were punished too severely. They got incorrect and long prison sentences or even unnecessarily died in camps. East Germany, as well as West Germany, but also the four Allied powers, after some years, all seem to have lost interest to bring the denazification to a proper end. And with that, this video has come to an end. Feel free to subscribe and hit the bell button to be kept informed about new East Germany videos. Thanks for watching.